Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the Comm Alumni Council Career Series. My name is Wendy McAnulty, and I will be hosting the session this evening. This series is hosted monthly by the Comm Alumni Council and features various alumni who share their career experience and answer your questions. You'll learn about different career opportunities available with a Comm degree, and in this session, you'll hear directly from Dylan Casey, our alumni of the month, about how he went from a UCSB grad to his current career. And each month, each session will feature a career spotlight with plenty of Q&A time. So again, tonight we are featuring Dylan Casey, who will speak to us about careers in marketing and product management. He is the Chief Product Officer at Reef Technology, and I'll talk a little bit more about him in just a moment. I'd like to just take a moment right now to review the schedule for just through the end of this academic year. Oh, what happened to it? Here it is. Okay. So in January, we had Allison Satelli talk about careers in event marketing. February, we had Jennifer Cruz talking about building a career in corporate comm. In March, we had Desiree Flores talking about careers in philanthropy and entertainment. This month, we have Dylan Casey talking about careers in marketing project management. And next month, please mark your calendar for May 10th at 6 p.m. We have Aladrian. Did I say that right? Anyone jump in and help me? Aladrian Goods, and she'll be talking about careers in design. Okay, and then also just while we're here, if everyone could just take a note of all of our social media opportunities to stay in touch with us. We have a private group on LinkedIn. We're on Instagram. We have a page on YouTube, Facebook, and Twitter. And just know that this event is being recorded and it will be posted on the Comm Department website and on the Comm Department YouTube channel. And so look for that. And I think what I want to do now is introduce our speaker. Let me get his bio. It's very impressive. Dylan is the Chief Product Officer at Reef Technology. Dylan leads the product engineering and design teams to focus on product development for Reef's proximity platform. Prior to joining Reef, Dylan has held product management executive roles at Goldman Sachs, Fair, Yahoo, Path, and Google. Dylan is also a retired professional cyclist and rode for the U.S. Postal Service cycling team alongside Lance Armstrong. He is an Olympian from the 2000 Olympic Games in Sydney and is a four-time national champion. While attending UC Santa Barbara, he earned a degree in communications. Let me turn it over to Dylan.
Thanks, Wendy. First, thanks for having me. This is fun. It's a little bit of kind of a walk down memory lane for me. So I appreciate having the opportunity to share that with you. And then hopefully I can answer some questions and maybe give a little bit of insights into kind of some key things that I've learned along the way that may be helpful for you. So it's interesting. I have a 17-year-old who's on the journey of trying to figure out where he wants to go to college, and in kind of going through that process with him, I've realized how different it is from when I went through that whole journey, and specifically around internships, because I was thinking about, as I was preparing for tonight, the internships, or I should say lack of internships that I did during my collegiate career. And I think a lot of that had to do with the fact that I was spending my summers racing bikes all over the United States. And that was really something that I discovered while I was a student at Santa Barbara. And I remember that the other thing I was doing during those summers is I was working for an electrician as an apprentice And he owned a company that did swimming pools. And so I spent the summer basically installing swimming pools and learning about home electric systems and racing my bike. Whereas now it seems like students are really focused on internships, with a focus on getting that first job right out of school. And so I think I have a whole new appreciation for how much more challenging I think today's environment is. But hopefully by the end of my talk, I will convince you that it's not that challenging. In fact, I think now more than ever, there's so many great opportunities for students like yourselves coming out of UC Santa Barbara. So I'll try to tie it all back to that. But the one internship that I did have was right after graduating from UC Santa Barbara. And I was very fortunate enough to get connected to an internship at a company called Communication Research Associates, which Dr. Siebold was a member of. And so when I was preparing to graduate, I remember either he told me about the internship or somehow I found out about it. And what I was thinking about, what I wanted to do after school, I was actually, I was really unsure. I didn't really have a concrete idea, but I was really enamored with a lot of the courses that I had around organizational communication, right? Which was, from what I recall, really around how we interacted with each other, how we communicated with each other. And I was particularly interested in the impact and change that technology was having on the workplace. And, this was in the mid-90s. So of course we were all starting to figure out what email was and video conferencing and things and tools like that. And I just remember really immersing myself in the kind of like the psychology of how those technologies were impacting everybody. And so the internship was really an interesting opportunity because I had the opportunity to work with Communication Research Associates, which was really focused on helping management teams, adopt these technologies and then also truly understand methodologies around analytics and cohort analysis and understanding, how do you implement a program and then measure its effectiveness. And so it was a really fascinating and interesting internship. I actually, the day I graduated, or maybe the week after I graduated from school, I packed up my car and drove across the country to Philadelphia, where the company was based. And it was a fun experience because I had just started to travel around the United States racing. And so this was kind of another opportunity to do that. But in full transparency, I remember having this very vivid moment where I realized that if I didn't take the opportunity and really chase after this dream of being an athlete at that moment in time, I would regret it later in life. And so, at the conclusion of my internship, instead of kind of pursuing what I thought was a traditional corporate job, I moved back to California, which is where I was born and raised, and just started racing. And I think, I was really fortunate, kind of in a serendipitous fashion, to be based in Palo Alto, California, in the late '90s, where, of course, the first real tech boom was occurring. And even though I was racing as an athlete, I was still immersed in that world, and I was able to develop a lot of relationships with people that worked in all the tech companies and got to kind of live vicariously through them as they were, pursuing their careers while I was pursuing a career as an athlete. And, during that time and leading up to that, I was always very, very drawn to technology. And, you know, I had a Commodore 64, which was like the first computer that most kids had. And, you know, I had one of the first Macintoshes and things like that. But, you know, there was this interesting experience that I had because, you know, one part of me, even though I was pursuing this dream of being an athlete, I was also thinking, wow, you know, I hope I'm not, you know, setting myself back relative to all my peers, you know, who, you know, I kind of thought were off, you know, setting themselves up for their career. And, you know, fortunately, you know, where I am now, I can look back and say that it was actually really fundamental. You know, being an athlete was fundamental to a lot of the success that I've had in the traditional corporate jobs that I've had. But one thing did happen while I was racing that I think really helped kind of lay the foundation for the career that I started when I retired as an athlete. And what that was is that I was starting to really get frustrated with a lot of the news articles and race reports of races that I actually competed in. And my perspective was that the journalists just were missing out on the best parts of the races. And, you know, so I just decided, well, why don't I just start writing my own race reports? And I thought to myself, well, okay, the best way to do that is to, you know, make my own website and start publishing race reports. Now, this is in this is 1999, 2000. And so there weren't a lot of publishing tools available to people. It wasn't really easy to publish content on the internet. So I had to teach myself HTML. I learned how to, you know, build a website. I learned how to use some kind of very rudimentary CMS tools. I learned how to host my website on a website server that was based in, I chose one on the East Coast so that, you know, while I was living and racing in Europe, which is where, you know, the kind of like the zenith of professional cycling was, I needed to have something that was easy to access over a 56K modem. And, you know, oftentimes I was in kind of like remote hotels in the mountains of France that didn't necessarily have the highest speed phone lines. So anyway, this web host was in Florida, and 1 year they sent me kind of, you know, serendipitously a web traffic report, which was essentially, you know, a log of all of the clicks on my website and where they came from and potentially what they clicked on my website and where they were going. And what I had done during that time was put up a bunch of essentially banners for all of the sponsors that I had. So it occurred to me, well, instead of negotiating my sponsorship contracts based on, you know, how many races I had won or, you know, how much exposure I was getting with the traditional cycling media, I used my web traffic report as a way to say, hey, look, I'm sending this much traffic to your website because I'm writing about races and people are coming to my website to read it and then going to your website. And so I used that to negotiate a lot of my sponsorship contracts. And this was a relatively, you know, the whole industry around web advertising was very nascent at the time. But a lot of the marketers were starting to understand, you know, the value of traffic and the value of kind of, quote, eyeballs, as they called it back then. And so I developed a lot of great relationships with a lot of these marketers. And in fact, eventually it got to the point where they were pre-buying space on my website to coincide with their product launches. And so then I started to kind of understand how companies thought about, you know, their go-to-market strategy and how they were using, you know, athletes and websites like mine as part of their strategy. And so I started to kind of get to work with them to develop those strategies. And of course, you know, we would use the feedback from my website as a way to kind of, you know, provide positive or negative signals with regards to their overall marketing strategy. So that was something that I did, you know, that was really, you know, a little bit of moonlighting relative to what my job was, which was, being a professional athlete. So the reason that story is relevant is that when I decided to retire from being an athlete, I knew that, okay, this is what I want to do, right? I want to somehow work in the technology industry, because I saw a lot of emerging, that they were innovating on new models around advertising. And as an athlete, you start to understand the business of advertising and sponsorship, because it's critical to the sport, right? It's the business model of the sport. So fortunately, again, I lived in Palo Alto in the off season, and I had developed a lot of relationships with people at other companies, and even some of my sponsors. And so what I did is I just started reaching out to all of them and saying, hey, look, I'm thinking about making this transition in my career. I think I would be a great asset to your team. Here's some of the things that I've done. And through that whole process, I managed to, get an interview at Google. And Google was, relatively young. It was, I think when I was there, there were about 600 or 700 employees globally. And it was in one little tiny building in Mountain View. And I was interviewing for a product marketing role. And I didn't really know what it was, but I had a friend that worked there, and he said, look, just come in and tell them about everything that you've done, and we'll figure out how to get you, we'll figure it out. And I remember one of the interviewers asked me a question, and it was a woman named Marissa Mayer, who was the product manager for search. And she asked me, she said, so Dylan, what is it that you think will make you successful here at Google? And I said, well, I think what I'm really good at is setting an objective, a goal, thinking about what it is that I need to accomplish that objective, and then working backwards from, a certain point in time to the date that I need to deliver on that objective, and then delivering. I'm really good at performing under pressure. As an athlete, that's critical. I'm really good at being resilient and managing setbacks and overcoming hurdles and adversity, which is a natural, which is a requirement of being an athlete. And I really enjoy the process. I really enjoy, doing the work to achieve the objective. And she said, well, where did you learn all of that? I said, well, those are all the critical skills necessary to be an athlete. And I think that would be extremely applicable to whatever it is that I would do here at Google. And so obviously I got the job, and I remember, being completely terrified, because I just, this was a completely new environment. I had never really worked in a corporate environment like that. But I was really fortunate because, it was a place that was still relatively young. The roles and responsibilities were not super well defined. And what that meant was that there was lots of opportunity to basically, identify problems that you could solve. And so that was something that I had always really, really enjoyed doing. Much like I said, hey, I don't like the way that these journalists are writing articles about these races that I'm in, so I'm just going to do it myself, right? And what I did was I said, okay, if I'm the person who wants to learn, I want to know what happened in this race, or I want to know what made this race unique or special, or what was the cool thing that happened. I tried to put myself in their shoes when I was writing. And it turned out that was a really critical skill to both product marketing and product management, right? Because in product marketing, what you're essentially doing is you're trying to position the value proposition of the product in a way that resonates with the user or the customer. And so I just applied the same kind of methodology and mentality towards that. And over time, I eventually evolved into the opportunity to move over to the product management side of the organization. And, really in a very succinct way, product management is really about understanding the objectives of either the company or the product that you're working on, and then deciding what are the most important things to work on to achieve that objective from a prioritization perspective. And it turns out that prioritization was also something that I was really good at. And I'll tell you a funny anecdote of how I figured out the power of prioritization. So as an athlete, especially in the sport of cycling, it's not like you go to practice every day and there's a coach there to tell you what to do. You pretty much have to do your training by yourself. And yeah, we have coaches that kind of help you with the program and help you with the type of training that you're going to do, but you ultimately have to do it yourself. Well, I remember this one day where I had a whole list of, kind of things that I needed to do, like go to the bank, go get my hair cut, go to the grocery store, just all the things that you have to do in life. And then of course, I also had a 5-hour block of training that I needed to complete. And, on this day, I kind of got distracted with all of the mundane tasks that I had to do. And all of a sudden I realized it was 3:30 in the afternoon and I had a 5-hour training ride to do. Well, it's not likely that I was going to be able to do that. And it turns out, I needed to do the most important thing first, because if I didn't go to the bank today, I could just go tomorrow and there's really no drawback. But if I don't get my training, the training blocking today, I can't make it up tomorrow. So I kind of understood this idea of prioritization, and then figured out how to, leverage that same type of mentality in this corporate setting. So, oftentimes now, especially, I get the question all the time, how did you make the transition from being an athlete to getting a job in product marketing and product management at a place like Google? And I basically said, well, it was the framework that I was able to apply, and I was able to articulate how that framework was applicable, in this new setting. And so that whole experience has been something that has really, been true in a lot of the different jobs that I've had. And I'll tell you a little bit why and how. So I spent almost 9 years at Google, and I really had, a wonderful experience, and had the opportunity to work on lots of different parts of the business. And I also had the opportunity to work with lots of different functions around the company. So for example, even though, my primary role interacted with other product managers and engineers and designers, I also worked with the marketing team, I worked with the legal team, I worked with the public relations team. And so I really started to understand how these cross-functional roles were really critical to the overall objective. And I started to think about, okay, how as my role as a product manager, can I start to bring together all of these different functions? And so I started developing ideas around frameworks again. So I joke that I left Google because I wanted to graduate and go work in the real world. And I went to work at a 20-person startup, which was a completely different, situation than the one that I had been in at Google. And I remember, one of the things that I recognized that I needed to do to, that really add a lot of value to the company at that particular moment in time in its life cycle, was to figure out how to get everybody to work well together. And again, that's where I started to think about frameworks. And, we started to think about, okay, well, as a startup, you're essentially running out of money every day, by definition. And so we started to think about, okay, well, what do we need to do as a startup to get to our next major milestone, which is in this case, raising more money. And I sat down with the founders and the CEO, and I said, okay, well, let's work backwards from the day that you need to raise money, and tell me what our pitch deck needs to say, right? Like, what do we need to say to our investors to encourage them and make them want to invest more money? And so we kind of came up with a list of what the deck should say. And then I basically said, okay, well, let's take that and we'll work backwards from that date to now and identify basically all the things that we're going to do, so that on that day, these are all true statements. And so this whole concept of kind of working backwards, which some of you may have heard is it's a common kind of framework that Amazon has made famous. We started to basically come up with this framework that we could say, okay, we're going to work backwards from this date, and we're going to prioritize. We're only going to work on the things that are the most important things to delivering on that. And so ultimately that was a successful outcome, and we sold the company. And then from there, I went to work at a company named Yahoo, which was funny because I spent the first 9 years of my career at Google trying to kill Yahoo, and had the opportunity to go work there with Marissa Mayer again, who was becoming the CEO. And it was a completely new experience because now we were trying to turn around a company that had really been struggling for many years. And so, you know, the main takeaway that I had from that whole experience was, in order to, you know, really take a team that I inherited and change the way that they thought about what they were doing, I had to really drive clarity for what their purpose was and make it super tangible about the work that they were doing and how it mattered to the company and to our customers. And then again, work backwards, right? And so we would basically start every day, you know, with an understanding of how what we were doing and how it correlated to an objective that we had. And even though it wasn't, you know, at that particular moment in time, it wasn't one of the coolest companies that you could work at, it was some of the most professionally rewarding work that I had done, because we really took this team that was struggling and turned them around to really deliver. And then ultimately sold that company to Verizon with a really good outcome for users and our shareholders. And then again, I got the startup bug again and went to work for a company called Fair, which was an auto finance company. And I had no experience in finance or in the automotive industry. But again, it was just saying, okay, well, look, let's break the problem down, understand, you know, what our customers need and what the problem is that we're trying to solve, and where the product value proposition was. And then again, take this framework and try to apply it and adjust it and think about what's unique about the situation I was in, and then make those modifications. And then ultimately that company got sold. And then one of my best friends that was my engineering partner at Yahoo convinced me to join him at Goldman Sachs, again, working in an industry that I had little to no experience in, with the ambition of bringing, you know, kind of the Silicon Valley product management led thinking to a 155-year-old company, which was a very traditional service-based organization. And so I spent 2 years there. And then I had the opportunity to join the company that I'm at now, where I'm the chief product officer, and I basically oversee the entire product development framework, which includes design, product management, engineering, data science, analytics, customer service, and a few others that that are blanking on. But what's interesting about my job now, and also just through kind of the evolution of my career, is I went from being what's, you know, commonly known as an individual contributor to then being a manager. And you know, not only am I responsible for multiple products and multiple teams, but the scope of my responsibility has changed a lot. And now I have 3 main objectives as the chief product officer. The first is to build and grow a world-class organization. And you know, what that means is it's a whole body of work around you know, attracting the best talent, retaining that talent, growing the people that we bring into the organization through career management and performance management, as well as giving people opportunities to, you know, achieve their own individual objectives. And then the second major objective that I have is around essentially defining this cross-functional product development framework that the whole company uses. And that's really around creating what I call rituals around, you know, how we're going to decide what our priorities are, how we're going to decide which technologies we use, how we're going to decide how to build the product and software that we build, and how do we go to market, and then ultimately, you know, how do we continue to grow the business. And then the third, and this is probably one of the most important, is telling the story and the narrative of the company, and then articulating how that story manifests itself in a roadmap. And again, it's this kind of working backwards framework from where we are now and where we need to get to. And so it's been an interesting journey, and I think I'm on the 6th of many more chapters to come. So that's been kind of my career journey, and I think it's a little bit unusual relative to a lot of my peers. But I think that many of my peers and many people that I've worked with will probably tell you the same thing, because I think ultimately we all realize that there's no straight line, right? Everything kind of goes left and right and up and down. And the thing that has really served me well throughout my entire career is just being able to understand the context and identify the unique elements of each one, and then understanding how to adjust various frameworks and experiences that I've had along the way to be relevant in that specific moment in time. But I think a lot of those skills and a lot of the experiences that I've had have really been shaped by a lot of the lessons that I learned as an athlete. So what's interesting is that what I thought was a potential career limiting move to pursue my passion as an athlete turned out to be one of my greatest assets. So I think the lesson learned there is that in the moment, it doesn't always seem obvious how what you're doing is going to lead to the next point in your career and the next point. But I think by just having clarity around, kind of like what you're trying to do in the moment and getting really, really good at that is always going to lead to something else. And it's almost as if you don't have to really worry about it. And I know that that's hard to hear when you have so much uncertainty in front of you, and there's a lot of pressure and a lot of expectation. But think about all the things that you've done to get to where you are now, because you certainly didn't get to UC Santa Barbara without a lot of hard work and planning and clarity around what you want to achieve. And I would say that just applying those same elements are going to be exactly the same thing that gets you into your first job and to the next job, and so on and so forth. So that's kind of my my main insight for you guys. So I'll stop there and open it up to questions.
So everyone, just want you to know that you are welcome to just ask your question directly, or you can put it in the chat, and I will go ahead and read them for Dylan.
I have a question. Hi, first of all, thank you so much. I'm a former athlete as well, so it was very insightful to hear what you had to say about putting it into practice in a professional setting. So that was very useful for me. Thank you. I have a question. So I was very fortunate to do the technology management program at UCSB. And I don't think that existed when you were doing that. I think it's a relatively new certificate program. But from that, I kind of knew straight away that I wanted to go into product management and development. And I was very fortunate to do an internship at American Airlines. And that was really great. Now I'm a recent grad. I graduated a year ago. And I'm finding that a lot of entry-level positions require 2 to 3 years of experience. And a lot of them don't really consider internships as valuable experience. So what's your advice on trying to combat that to getting your first professional role?
Yeah, that's a great question. And the good news is that you're right, there's so many more resources available now, especially in product management. And the funny thing is, even today, people will say, what is product management? What do you do again? What's your job? And there's really, honestly, there's probably 10 different really good answers to that question. But I think that, if I put myself in the shoes of the hiring manager, I can share with you some of the things that really stand out to me when I'm meeting candidates. you know, it's amazing how powerful it is when a candidate really understands kind of the problem that you're trying to solve, right? And I even did this, you know, even when I was, I mean, look, I've interviewed for a million jobs myself, and I feel like every time I'm interviewing for a job, I have to get like, you know, essentially a master's degree in whatever it is that they do, and I just immerse myself in, and I read as much as I can. And now, you know, there's so many tools available, whether it's, you know, Figma or, you know, prototyping tools that are available that you can use to build, you know, quick little demos and prototypes. And I can tell you, anytime I meet somebody and they're like, hey, I've thought a lot about what you're doing. I noticed that you know, your product does XYZ. You know, I think you guys should actually think about doing this. And by the way, I created a little demo. Do you want to see it? Right? Like that type of initiative, and just showing that you're like, you know, you're deep in the problem, and that you have this idea, that's worth more than whatever experience you had in the past, right? And the other thing to think about is that, you know, as a hiring manager, when you're saying, oh, I want you to have so much experience, what you're really trying to do is like de-risk the decision. Does that make sense? Because you're almost saying, okay, well, if you have some experience, then I don't have to worry I don't have to put as much thought into whether or not predicting that you're going to be able to do this job. Just like when Marissa said, hey, you're an athlete, what makes you think you're going to do, you know, you're going to be successful here? You know, I was able to kind of say, oh, well, actually, I know exactly how I'm going to do it. And I think that kind of like mentality, like, because if you think about it, when you're interviewing for a job, I heard somebody say this, and it was really kind of interesting. You're basically trying to figure out a way to, you're trying to decrease the amount of risk that they're taking. Does that make sense? And so that's why when you basically, you know, have a demo, or you show that you've done a bunch of homework, and you know, you're already immersing yourself in the problem, it eliminates all of that. And so I think that's one of the best ways to kind of, you know, get past the whole how many years of experience. Now, the other thing is, and the other reason that startups are generally really attractive for people that don't have a lot of experience, is because startups themselves don't really understand what roles and responsibilities they need, right? Oftentimes they're just looking for really smart people who are motivated and passionate about what, you know, whatever it is that startup is working on. And, you know, I used to joke, like, you know, when I went to work at Path, and I was employee 19, it was like really a startup, you know, as the only product manager, I used to think, you know, my job included everything from deciding what the most important things were to work on, to making sure everybody had coffee. You know what I mean? Because I was like, okay, I just need to make sure I'm covering everything that's necessary for us to ship product. And so, you know, those are other opportunities to look at as well. And those are also the places that you tend to learn the most, because you'll get exposed to so many different things.
Okay, thank you so much.
Yeah, no problem. Yeah.
Hi, I have a question too. First, I'm just very, very encouraged by how you were able to show us that you didn't just have one career or one job, that, you know, there's like you had multiple, and I think that's pretty contrary, at least to what I hear, like,
Yep.
about, you know, going out of college, you need to find your one career that you're gonna do. But yeah, but going off like what you talked about in terms of startups, like, do you think there's like what do you think is the biggest difference in terms of like what you can learn in a startup versus like in maybe like Google, like a bigger kind of organization? Like, are there different kinds of opportunities to learn, and like, yeah, anything you could say on that?
Yeah, I think the difference is that, you know, in a more mature organization, and think about it from a life cycle perspective, because, you know, when companies are relatively young, there's less rigidity around, what people are doing in the company. Now, for some people, that's really uncomfortable, right? Because there's not as much structure, and there's not as much, like, the processes and frameworks aren't super well established. But the positive side of that is that, you don't necessarily have to get a job in the specific function or role that you think you want. If you can just get a job doing anything, that's a huge opportunity, because, I guarantee you that, and I've even seen this at all the companies that I've worked at, is that, people move around internally like crazy. And I think this idea that, in fact, I'll tell you one anecdote of a mistake that I made in my career once, because I was so like, focused on my identity as being a product manager. But I'll come back to that in a second. But to answer your question specifically, I think, startups offer you, sometimes it's easier to get a job at a startup because, they're not as well established, and they're also just looking for people with raw talent and passion. And as the organization grows, you're going to have the opportunity to grow into different roles. And it's a great opportunity to kind of try different things to see exactly what you like. So that's my main answer to your question. But to tell you a funny anecdote, I was at Google, and, I was a product manager in an organization that was very, very rigid around the type of candidates that they hired for product management roles. And in fact, there was a rule that was, somehow I managed to skirt around, but there was a rule, more or less, that in order to be a product manager in that job function with that job code, and in the HR system, you had to have a computer science degree from like a handful of schools. Now, somehow I think I might have benefited from graduating from UC Santa Barbara, because Urs Holtz, who was one of the earliest Google engineers, was from Santa Barbara. And I can't remember if he was on the academic side, but anyway, he was from UC Santa Barbara. And of course, UC Santa Barbara has a very strong computer science department. But the story was, I didn't have a CS degree, and I managed to get myself into a product management role. And so I was very focused. I almost had like a little bit of a inferiority complex, or like imposter syndrome, which you hear about all the time, right? And so I was like, okay, I got the product management job, and one of the senior vice presidents, which was like the most senior title below the CEO, called me one day. And I was on paternity leave when my daughter was born, and he called me and he said, "Hey, Dylan, listen, we're about to do a complete redesign of the entire of all of Google, and we were sitting around talking about this and asking ourselves, who do we think would be really good at leading this project?" And everybody said your name. And so we'd like you to be the project manager for this entire effort. And I was like, well, project manager? I'm not a project manager. I'm a product manager, right? Like I build products. And so I turned the opportunity down. And in hindsight, it was absolutely one of the worst decisions that I made, because what they were basically offering me was an opportunity to be the fixer, right? They were like, God, we got this big problem. We have this big project. We don't know who can do it. And somebody said Dylan, and like, yeah, let's get Dylan to do it. He's really good at it. And what I failed to recognize is that the recognition of my skills as being good at something, and also the opportunity to do something that was going to have a really big impact across the entire company, was far bigger and far more impactful than my own personal career ambition. You know what I mean? And so, I mean, it all worked out, but if I had it to do over again, I should have just dropped everything and said, no problem. Like, I'll be there tomorrow morning at 8. So I think it's, those are things to think about. And I think it's relevant to, some of the challenges that you guys are going to experience starting your career is like, oh, this job is not exactly what I want, or the job description doesn't read, exactly the way, I want to start my career. And I think it's really worth considering that, this is just the first step of many, many steps that you're going to take. And, oftentimes the opportunity is much bigger than you can think about. So hopefully that's helpful.
Yes, thank you so much for sharing.
Yeah, you're welcome.
Hi, I had a quick question, kind of in line with what you were just saying.
Yeah.
I was able to work the past 2 summers in product marketing at a tech company, and I noticed that in the product team, they're all engineers and they have an engineering background.
Right.
And so it felt very impossible to reach from someone with like a background in communication.
Yeah.
And so I'm curious, how did you develop those skills, or how did you differentiate yourself? I guess you kind of touched on it already, but as you grew into your roles and in multiple product roles, and been able to fulfill the needs of the job.
Well, so I'll tell you about this one project that I did at Google that really opened up the doors for me. And I was working I was on the marketing side at this time, and let's see, who was it? Short stories. Prada was opening a store in Beverly Hills, and they had commissioned this very well-known architect and designer named Rem Koolhaas to basically build out these stores. And so I don't know how we got connected. It was Prada was probably one of our advertisers, and they kind of networked their way around internally in the organization. They had this funny idea, and somehow it landed on my desk. And what Rem Koolhaas wanted to do is he wanted to put these flat screen TVs all over the inside of the store. And what he wanted to do was basically take the headlines from the Los Angeles Times and take a karaoke style cursor over the headline and then render the first image from Google image search in the background. And we were like, okay, that sounds kind of cool. And, we were kind of experimenting with different, uses of our products. And so I went and found out who the engineers were for Google image search. And I said, hey, do you think we could build an API that we could expose, give access to for this one particular project? And they were kind of like, I don't know, it seems kind of weird, blah, blah, blah. But anyway, long story short, I figured out how to convince them to do this and why it was relevant to Google image search. And we did it, and it turned out to be a huge success. Although it was funny, somebody figured out how to basically tweak the results through search engine optimization techniques to change the first image result. And so that became a whole story in and of itself, which, by the way, turned out to be great press for Google and Prada. So I think that was, a huge success. But in that process, I was basically able to convince people that I understood how to connect essentially the objective of the product, which in this case was Google image search, with a specific project, right? Like a use case. And then tie it all together in a way that made sense for the business and made sense for our users. And so, fortunately, I was in a situation where I could kind of like prove on the job that I could do the job. And that's how I got my foot in the door to start doing more product management. But, that's a great example of like, if you can just get into the organization, those opportunities will present themselves one way or another. And it's really it's up to you to really taking advantage of those opportunities, right? And so maybe it was something that like right, this is one of those scenarios where the product managers were like, I don't want to waste my time with that. And I was like, I'll do it, right? And so I think, the kind of foundational skills of product management, which are understanding the business, understanding what the customer needs, and then having a great deal of empathy and curiosity, that will transcend, kind of whatever skills you think you may not have as an engineer or without a computer science degree. And by the way, I mean, in the last 3 or 4 weeks, I think we've all seen that, knowing how to code is becoming a commodity, right? So I think that's even more that's even more reason to kind of like critical thinking and analytics and understanding the customer and being able to see the problem through the customer's eyes is going to be even more important than just understanding pure computer science. So I think the opportunities are there.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, you're welcome.
We have 5 minutes left. Does anyone else have a question?
One other thing, one other kind of like piece of advice I can give is, now there's so much information about what companies and what people that work at those companies are doing and what they're working on, right? Whether you follow them on Twitter or Instagram. I can't stress enough how powerful it is to, to follow people and just, send them direct messages. Like I was saying to Roxanne about building demos, or even just showing, hey, I had this idea, do you want to see it? It's so easy now to connect with people. I have people do it with me all the time, and I respond to almost everybody as much as I can when they reach out to me with ideas, just because I love it when people take that kind of initiative and they show that they're really interested. And so I'd really encourage you guys to do that. Think about the companies or the products that you admire or that you are passionate about, and go learn as much as you can about them, and learn and connect with the people that are working at those companies, because that's always the best way to get your foot in the door, especially as new grads or just with a couple years of experience, because that goes a long way.
Well, that's great advice, Dylan. Thank you.
Yeah.
All right. Well, I think we've all been incredibly enlightened with all of your insight and your knowledge. And we have, let's see, if you're interested in serving in the role. We have one more question. Cody asks, if you're interested in serving in the role of product and doing the challenges they do, you don't need to just work in tech. Patagonia has product managers. Tide has product managers. Personally, I am director of PM at video game company, where a CS degree is not needed. Depends on what you're seeking, to work in tech or to work in product. They're not necessarily tied together. So
yeah, that's a great point, Cody. Thanks for bringing that up. In fact, product management has traditionally been a role that people think is only relevant or impactful in the technology industry. But I can tell you that, many companies are going through what they call digital transformations, which that term kind of gives me an allergic reaction, because I feel like every company has to be digital these days. But the point being is that, product management is also, there's also this kind of idea of being product led, right? Which is really just about having empathy for the customer and understanding their problem. And I think that that's relevant in many industries, whether your product is, a video game or it's a jacket at Patagonia, right? You want to understand, okay, well, I'm cold and, but I need to have something that breathes well. And I'm, it's going to get warm later in the day. So what kind of product are you going to build for me? And again, it's just like being able to put yourself in the shoes of the customer and think about the experience that they have, and how is your product, going to set, how is your product going to be better than everything else in the marketplace for that customer? And so it really is a mentality more than just, a pure skill.
All right. Well, unfortunately, we're running out of time. So thank you again, Dylan, for joining us this month and sharing your wisdom.